60. Essence and existence. All being is contingent and dependent by virtue of its composition. Participation itself is an act of entering into composition with something in order to form a whole. Participation is also the actualizing of potency. For example, a dog has the potentiality to get wet and becomes wet through actualizing that potency, and it may be said that the wet dog participates in water, which causes the wetness. In like manner, metaphysically, an essence participates in existence through the act of being in order to have being. Whatever is brought into existence has had its potency, its potential for existence by virtue of its essence, actualized. This makes existent being a composition of both act and potency, and essence and existence. The actualization of a potency, and any act of composition or decomposition is called motion. 161. Aquinas asserts that, in everything which is moved, there is some kind of composition found. 162. Being is the composition of essentia, essence, and this act of being or existence, through that motion of coming to be, which makes it an individual or substance. Being, therefore, is a composition of essence and existence, which is also like the motion of potency to act. Potency is related to essence, and act is related to existence. Existence is really the act of essence. Aquinas writes in On Spiritual Creatures, since everything participates in the first act, God, by assimilation insofar as it has its existence, the participated existence in each thing must be related to the nature, essence, which participates in its act to potency. 163. As affirmed by Aquinas and others, essence, essentia, and existence are as potency is to act. All existent being is in composition as to essentia, which is as potency, and this, which is as act. Therefore, all being is composite and contingent, and subsequently, in need of a composer, an uncomposed composer. 164. Francis Turretin confirms that composition is the formal reason of a being originated and dependent. 4. Nothing can be composed by itself, but whatever is composed must necessarily be composed by another. God is the first and independent being, recognizing no other prior to himself. 165. In other words, the nature of the universe and all it contains declares that an essentially existing being created it, actualizing its essence, composing its being that it may exist. 166. This first and independent being is the composer of all that is, including angels, composing essence and existence through the act of creation. All that is, the physical universe, is in composition as to life, that is, matter and form, motion, that is, act and potency, and being, that is, essence and existence. The composition of being, Acts 17:28, Table 3, life, motion, being, form / matter, potency / act, essence / existence. Back to charts. Top motion is simply the undergoing of change, either substantially or accidentally. Motion is the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. It is the act of that which is in potency. Thomas Aquinas describes motion as the actuality of a being in potency. 167. Whatever is in motion is in act, and therefore, cannot be both mover and moved in respect to the same thing. Accordingly, anything that is in motion must be moved by another. Since that which is moved to exist must be generated by what is already in existence. All things are in motion as they come to be, change, or cease to be. All things are indifferent or neutral to this motion, and therefore, they are dependent on another for their movement or actualization. This is the principle of motion. It is not locomotion, it is the motion of act and potency, hence, it is not related to the principle of inertia. Aristotle explains, everything that is in motion must be moved by something. 168. Furthermore, motion cannot be an infinite chain, as it is not possible to proceed to infinity in movers and things moved. 169. A thing's coming to be is also an instance of motion. It is the actualization of an individual, a suppositum. Aquinas also states, nothing begins to be or ceases to be except through motion or change. 170. The Apostle Paul professes this truth in the presence of the Stoic and Epicurean philosophers on Mars Hill. He proclaimed that in God we live and move and have our being, Acts 17:28, emphasis added. This is an implicit statement that God is, indeed, pure actuality and subsisting being. The Apostle Paul was certainly not ignorant of the philosophical weight of this statement. Authorial meaning and the immediate context of the passage is an important aspect of the historical grammatical method of interpretation. With this in view, it is obvious that his audience would have understood motion and being in its Aristotelian context. Further, the fact that the Apostle Paul quoted the Greek poet Epimenides with approval confirms the truth of the underlying philosophical principle along with its theological assertion. This is an example of truth by the light of natural reason or general revelation, which is also witnessed to by Scripture. As far as the philosophical notion of life, motion, and being is concerned, mankind seeking zeta eta tau epsilon omega, zetio, for God resulted in this apprehension of reality. Acts 17:27. 171. The truth is that the natural man can grasp the doxa knowledge of God, and this is God's reward for such groping. Hebrew 11:6. The distinction of essence, essentia, and existence, e/epsilon, a thing's existence is not a part of its essence. It is other than or distinct. 172. Essences, concepts, forms, or ideas are not yet. They are potentialities, potencies in need of an act. Therefore, every essence is in need of its act of being or actus essendi in order to have real being. 173. For a real being, its existence is merely accidental, it is non-essential to what it is. Existence in contingent being is per accidens in relation to its essence. In other words, existence is not a part of a thing's essence, essentia, what it is. It is distinct and must come from without in order for it to be. Further, things are understood and defined by their essences and not their existence. What a thing is can be fully comprehended without any reference to that it is, whether it exists or not. Aquinas explains, for a thing is not intelligible except by virtue of its definition and essence. 174. All things are defined according to their essences, which does not include their existence. In this, the real distinction of essence and existence becomes clear. The definition of a $3 bill remains the same whether or not it actually exists. Its definition does not inform us of its actual existence. The distinction of e/epsilon is further illustrated in our ability to know, for example, what the triangle is without any reference to whether or not a particular triangle actually exists. 175. Therefore, in all things there is a distinction of essence and existence. Etienne Gilson elaborates, it cannot be doubted that this distinction is real, but it arises in the metaphysical order of act and potency, not in the physical order of the relation of parts within a material whole. This distinction is real in the highest degree, since it expresses the fact that a being whose essence is not its act of being has not of itself the wherewithal to exist. We know from experience that such beings exist, since they are all we know directly. They exist therefore, but we know too that they do not exist in their own right. Since their lack of existential necessity is congenital, it is with them as long as they endure. So long as they exist, they remain beings whose existence finds no justification in their own essence. It is this that is the distinction between essence and the act of existing. 176. The argument for the distinction of e/epsilon can be formulated as follows. 1. No essence can be known without an understanding of those things that are a part of an essence. In other words, an essence is understood when all of its parts are comprehended. 2. Whatever is not included in the understanding of an essence comes from outside of that essence and makes a composition with it. 3. Every essence or thing can be understood without knowing whether or not it actually exists in reality. 4. Therefore, existence is other than essence in things, e/epsilon is really distinct. 177. Since existence is not a part of a thing's essence, it could only be added to an essence through an act of being. For anything to exist there must be one, and only one, in whom essence and existence are identical, who is not a thing, but is the ground of being in all things, who would be ipsumis subsistens, or the composition of essence and existence could never be actualized. This one would be as per se, being essentially, and not being qua being, being among being. This one would be as purum, pure being, as tantum, being alone, and actus purus, pure act. As pure being and pure act, this one would be the first cause of all that is, actualizing all things. This metaphysical understanding underlies Aquinas' third way. He writes, we find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be, since they are found to be generated, and to corrupt, and consequently, they are possible to be and not to be. But it is impossible for these always to exist, for that which is possible not to be at some time is not. Therefore, if everything is possible not to be, then at one time there could have been nothing in existence. Now if this were true, even now there would be nothing in existence, because that which does not exist only begins to exist by something already existing. Therefore, if at one time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist, and thus even now nothing would be in existence, which is absurd. Therefore, not all beings are merely possible, but there must exist something the existence of which is necessary. 178. The vital distinction of essence and existence in being has been understood in philosophy and theology for centuries. Alpha AB 8872-950 and Avicenna 8980-1037, who were Islamic philosophers, both taught the distinction of essence and existence. It was the Church Father, Anisus Manlius Severinus Boethius AD 480-524, who first expounded this important distinction and heavily influenced Thomas Aquinas, but all of these men, including Aquinas, were students of Aristotle and Plato's thought. Boethius in On the Hebdomades made the fundamental distinction that what a thing is and that it is it quidist are diverse. 179. He taught that a thing's form or quiddity whatness was one thing, and a thing's existence was another. This distinction is the difference between the form/concept/essence in reason in ratio, and its actualized existence, in reality in re. This is the differentiation between the concept of running and the actual runner. Aquinas comments, therefore he says first that being is and that which is it quidist are diverse. For we signify one thing by saying, to be, and something else by saying, that which is, just as we also signify one thing when we say, to run, and something else by saying, on running. For, to run and to be are signified in the abstract, just as whiteness is. But what is, that is, a being, and on running are signified in the concrete, as is a white item. 180. This distinction makes all existent things dependent and contingent as demonstrated earlier. As such, their existence is not necessary. They could either be or not be. Aquinas confirms that everything whose act of existing is other than its nature must have its act of existing from another. 181. Therefore, a being that does not exist essentially but exists, per accidens, as a composition of E/epsilon, must be brought into existence by another. This composition must begin with one who exists essentially and necessarily, one whose existence is per se. The distinction of essence and existence in things is further evidenced in the fact that the intellect can comprehend what a thing is in reference to the essence alone, without any reference to an instantiated instance of any particular thing. For example, the human nature itself exists in the intellect as abstracted from all individuating characteristics, that is, apart from the actual individual. 182. The mind can understand the essence of a man without knowing whether or not that man exists in reality. The intellect can grasp the essence of the great star pilot and Sith Lord, Darth Vader, without any consideration of the actual existence of Anakin Skywalker. The mind can also comprehend the quiddity whatness of a dodo bird or a brachiosaurus. The fact that they no longer exist has no bearing on the intellect's comprehension of their essence. Aquinas demonstrates this point decisively. Whatever does not enter into the understanding of an essence or quiddity comes to it from without and enters into composition with the essence, since no essence could be understood without the parts that make it up. Every essence or quiddity, however, can be understood without its being understood that it exists in fact, for I can understand what a man or a phoenix is, and yet not know whether they are given in reality. Therefore, it is clear that existence is other than essence or quiddity, unless indeed there should be something whose quiddity essence is its existence, as in God. And such a thing, that is, God, could only be unique and first. 183. The great chain of being must start in one whose existence is per se, that is, essential and necessary. The argument can be either a priori or a posteriori. It can start with the necessary existence of an uncomposed composer, who is metaphysically simple, 184, and move to the existence of contingent being. 185. This sublime simple start rationally explains and is existentially necessary for anything to come to be. The argument can also be made from contingent being back to the necessity of the uncomposed composer, arguing from effect back to cause. 186. For every composite is posterior to its component parts, and is dependent on them. Every composite has a cause, for things and themselves. Cannot unite unless something causes them to unite. 187. This is the power of the argument, for existence must be added from without in composed, contingent being. Ralph McInerney writes, "It seems clear enough that natural things do not exist by definition, as if existence were what they are or part of what they are, since, if that were so, they could not be. But natural things are simply things which come into being, then cease to be. If there is something which exists by definition, which cannot not exist, it is unique and first, it is God." 188 closing bracket. 189 Act and potency as essence and existence. The first of the 24 themistic theses states, potency and act divide being in such a way that whatever is either pure act, or of necessity it is composed of potency and act as primary and intrinsic principles. As seen above, all being is composed of essence/existence, and act/potency. All composition is actually a variation of the act/potency distinction. The act/potency relationship is fundamental in all being. Without this essential understanding, all being would erroneously fall under the category of pantheism. James de Rezal confirms that matter and form, existence and essence, substance and accidents as models of composition are understood as variations of the composition of act and potency. 190 The fact that being is divided as to different essences is the only answer to the ancient Parmenidean pantheists and pantheism in general. Pantheism was the Parmenidean solution to the problem of the one and the many, also called the issue of unity and diversity. Norm Geisler explains, the real distinction within being ends between essence, essentia, and existence seems to be the only satisfactory answer to the Parmenidean problem of unity and plurality. Without an analogy of being there is no way to account for multiplicity. In univocity of being things are either unrelated or identical. Further, if being is taken univocally then there could only be one being. All being is then identical, entire sameness leaves no room for any difference in being. Furthermore, if being is taken equivocally, then there can be no more than one being. For if this is being and everything else is totally different from it, then everything else is non-being. For what is totally different from being would be non-being. The only way to avoid the monistic, pantheistic conclusion that follows from either an equivocal or a univocal view at beings is to take an analogical view. 191 The act/potency distinction seen in the differentiation of essence and existence is the basis for the analogy of being. Norm Geisler further states that essence and existence are related as actuality is to potentiality. Finite beings have different potentialities, essences. These finite beings can be differentiated in reality when these potentialities are actualized or brought into existence in different kinds of being. 192 In order for a potency to be actualized it must be moved upon by another. This is true whether it is seen in the composition of essence and existence in something coming to be, or the acquisition of knowledge by a professor. This is also the argument of Aquinas' first way. He writes, "Now whatever is in motion is put in motion by another, for nothing can be in motion except it is in potentiality to that towards which it is in motion, whereas a thing moves inasmuch as it is in act." For motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality. But nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality, except by something in a state of actuality. 193 The identity of essence and existence in God attests to the truth that he is pure actuality. God is pure act because he essentially exists. He exists out of his own essence and has no potency or motion whatsoever. This is also the definition of his immutability. In order for any potency to be actualized there must be one who is already in act. The composition of act and potency must have started in one who is pure act, with no admixture of potency at all, or that one would have to look to another for its potency to be actualized. It is existentially, ontologically necessary that there is one who essentially is, or nothing would ever come to be. This is the answer to the greatest question ever contemplated: why is there something rather than nothing? God is pure act and he actualizes all potency or motion. There would not, and could not, be any motion without him. Aquinas affirms, whatever is in potency is, by that very fact, movable. 194 Therefore, God is the mover of all potencies, yet he himself is unmoved. If God were not pure act, no potencies could ever be actualized. If God's essence and existence were not identical, nothing would ever exist. Because God is pure act, he can initiate motion and stand as the ground and cause of all being.